Tom and Mandy, the crowd here formed very quickly after that shooting, which happened about 12:20 this afternoon. A lot of folks still out here, gathered around right now. It appears someone succumbed to the heat. Many others have arrived since the shooting. Some have left. The folks who have been coming out here carrying signs, some shouting, all upset over another shooting by an officer fewer than 3 miles from the unrest in Ferguson. And Tom, let me set the scene for you out here in Ferguson. We're along West Florissant. Nothing organized here, but some folks on this side of the street with signs. Across the way, more people honking as they come through. And of course, outside the burned out shell of the Quick Trip here, which has kind of become a symbol of all things that have gone wrong here in recent days. But earlier today, they saw to it that their message and their demands are heard well outside this small North County community. ATM machine, they got in there. All the cash is gone. Don't know how they pried that open, but they got in there. All the cash from that is gone. And you take a look, product, the liquor area, that's pretty much gone. Cigarettes, all this kind of stuff that's behind the counter, all gone at this point. And then you can see just the general mess that was made. Talking to the owners of the store, they're part of this community. They want to do business here. They want to reopen. Tom and Mandy, police say this went on for more than 2 years. People who thought Alyssa Jackson was their friend were the ones who eventually turned her in. The thing that finally tipped them off, Jackson calling them one night saying she was being rushed to the hospital, essentially saying goodbye to them. Well, they rushed to the hospital too. And Alyssa Jackson had never been there. Because we talk about laws, and the way you tend to get laws changed in this country is by rallying public opinion and getting a large enough group of people upset about something that you make a change. Speaking particularly about St. Louis and Missouri, the Latino population here is comparatively small. Sure. How do you muster that rage or that anger or that whatever it is amongst the public that something is not right, when the fact of the matter is most people in St. Louis and in Missouri don't run across too many Latinos? It is the story of an inner city bakery, an Eastern religion, a group of convicted felons, and the woman who brings it all together. That woman, a Buddhist priest, makes hardened men light up at the mention of her name, Kaylin.
She's cool. Kaylin cool. Kaylin, she's just a live wire. I like Kaylin.
Travis Jones is one of nearly 30 people who have walked out of prison and into this kitchen of Kaylin McAllister's making. The Laughing Bear Bakery is quite a story, one that has now turned the heads of a small documentary group in New York City.
I think it's the fact that you have to have a felony to work at the bakery.
And that fact is changing the lives of those who work here. Start with Travis, whose checkered past has made basic survival on the outside a challenge.
I'm 32. Out of 32 years, I done spent like 14 behind bars. I've been to Bonter, Bowling Green, Tipton, Charleston, Crossroad. I've been to a few prisons.
And as it is for so many inmates, getting out has not offered much.
If they did their full time, they got a bus ticket back to where the crime was committed. Not necessarily home, but where the crime was committed. And like $8.50 if they didn't save up any money. And they were on the street, basically.
She knows this because she spent more than 5 years as the chaplain at the state prison in Farmington, the only Buddhist who has ever held such a position in Missouri.
People would come up to me when they got their notice that they would be released in a couple weeks, and they would be panicking because they said they're going to be on the streets. And I promised the guys, I said, you know, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to have a job for people coming out of prison. So I thought, I like to bake. I can't cook. I cannot cook, but I love to bake.
And the Laughing Bear was her answer to that panic. The goal was to allow these recently released inmates to have a chance when they got out and to work among people who have walked in their shoes, people who will help them succeed at freedom.
This is an environment where, like, they tell me they have to go see a parole officer. I go, cool, come back when you're done. Because they're required to do that. And in any other job, they wouldn't let them off.
They also give us clothes, you know, food, you know, just things to make sure that we all right. you know, that we are able to take care of ourselves.
How much of a difference is it making? Well, consider the fact that most people who get out of prison go back in. The recidivism rate, as it's called, hovers in the 60 to 70% range. 24 people have worked here over the last 3 years. Only one has gone back. That's 4%.
Without a job and education, you're going back. It's just, if you can't have a few dollars in your pocket, pay rent, pay utilities, buy yourself some food, then you will commit crimes to get same.
Mike Gann would know. He was deputy warden at Farmington, Kalen's boss, before taking over as president of the board here.
It's rewarding both for the providing the employment and seeing the success rate, and quite frankly, for the quality of the products we put out. My Lord, there's some good stuff.
So what about all this draws the attention of a documentary film crew? Not so much the success as the good deed. The film, Second Chances, is part of a series produced by this group of Buddhist documentarians called On Buddha's Path, Compassion in Action. What is being done here is giving hope to those who return to society with very little.
In Buddhism, we have a saying that for a bird to fly, it has two wings. And one is wisdom and one is compassion. And it takes both to fly. And they walk out of there, sometimes with just the clothes on their back. And they're supposed to make it. So some people come in with a lot of skills, some people have none, but we're supportive.
But you know, I'm not used to freedom. Like you're not used to being locked up because that's not your, your walk. See, my walk, I've been locked up for a substantial amount of time throughout my life.
The baked goods are available at places like Straub's Groceries and St. Louis Cinemas. Growing the business will allow them to grow the good deeds.
The more we could sell our product, the more people we could hire. And people see films like this and they instantly contacting us to fill out an application to get a job here. And I would love to take every one of them in, but we're limited.
What is seemingly unlimited is the potential for a program that is effective in helping those who get out to stay out.
You cannot change anybody. There's no way you could ever change a person, but if they're in a compassionate environment and they're doing something that they enjoy doing and they feel successful and they feel valued, they'll change themselves.
Our story begins essentially where it ends, on the streets of North St. Louis, in spots where you can see the gleaming Gateway Arch, but the prosperity and investment around it seem a million miles away. The latest solution being offered comes from two billionaires, Jack Dorsey, the St. Louisan who co-founded Twitter, and Bill Pulte, a mega-rich Detroiter from a building background. They say tearing much of this down, getting rid of the blight, is the answer to the problem. The local alderman is right on board.
We're getting rid of the slum and blight so that developers can see the vision of rebuilding our community. We are standing on fertile soil for development, ladies and gentlemen.
But what if we told you this was the end result of a plan? A document written more than 4 decades ago, essentially calling for triage on a dying city, offering step-by-step instructions on how to let neighborhoods crumble. That document exists. The official name was Citywide Implementation Strategies, the Draft Comprehensive Plan. But for those around in the early and mid-'70s, when it was written and then published, it is identified by the name of the consulting company that wrote it. They call it Team 4.
But that Team 4 plan, it was, mess was kind of racist too.
Could you have done it without sounding racist or looking racist? I don't know, it's a great question.
The plan was a response to this report from 1973, the Rand Report, read like an obituary for the city of St. Louis, saying, as things stand, the most likely prognosis is continued decline, and continuing, the city of St. Louis might assume a new role as a large suburb among suburbs. This sent city leaders into a near panic and led two young aldermen, Richard Gephardt, who went on to become our most powerful congressman, and John Roach, who would eventually run the Community Development Administration, to lead a charge to respond to Rand. In 1973, they put a pair of bills in front of the Board of Aldermen that to this day many feel was a roadmap for the 1975 Team 4 plan. A November 1973 article in the St. Louis Argus laid out the outrage elicited in the African American community, quoting one of the bills, calling predominantly black North St. Louis, quote, an insignificant residential area not worthy of special maintenance effort. The bills called for 74,000 buildings in predominantly white South St. Louis to be preserved and over 70,000 others in North St. Louis to be torn down. The African American community was collectively beside itself.
That they were going to allow for North St. Louis to die on the vine. And that was when some folks had some concern, especially with this term about benign neglect.
A big part of today's story of North St. Louis comes with one of our city's most perplexing set of questions. Just who is Paul McKee and what is he trying to accomplish? Is he the man who set the table for the largest investment in the North Side's history? Or is he the man who bought up over 1,000 properties and let most of them rot? Is he the visionary who sees hope for the North Side and has said so with his pocketbook? Or is he a profiteer who has been part of putting families out of their homes? In one way or another, the answer to all of these questions is yes. Despite repeated requests, Paul McKee declined to be interviewed for this report.
It's horrible. They don't want to come and cut it. They wait till it grows up so high that the babies can go and hide and you can't find them.
Jerry Whitaker wasn't aware who the owner of the lot next door is, but in fact, it's Paul McKee. He owns the vacant buildings adjacent to that as well. His quiet ownership and lack of maintenance are a signature, according to his critics. They say it's the way he has tried to clear property and accumulate large tracts of North Side land to develop, a strategy that goes all the way back to the Team 4 plan of the 70s.
Some citizens living in the community kept their property up, but then a property next to it was allowed to deteriorate. That brought down the value of the property it was next to. And then, of course, those people were saying they were being, constantly annoyed about, you better hurry up and move out before your property value deteriorates more than what it is now, because it'll be down to practically nothing. So those kind of tactics were used to force people out.
Some call it blockbusting.
Blockbusting, I think, also in this case is how McKee was able to depress property values, to scare people, because if you're the last person on the block and every other building's being broken into or burned down in the middle of the night,
You've got to sell.
it's scary, it's dangerous, it's not safe.
Now the on-duty officer charged under death is out of jail.
A fellow officer shot Green, although Green had already interacted with other officers at the scene.
And a St. Louis police lieutenant is under investigation this evening.
And what authorities are calling a game of Russian roulette gone horribly wrong.
It has been a trying year for the St. Louis Police Department. You need look no further than the slew of headlines that seem almost endless. Officers shooting other officers, a game of Russian roulette ending the life of a young cop, racist social media posts, a prosecutor refusing to allow some officers to appear in court, lawsuits over excessive force, on and on and on. It is raising an uncomfortable question in segments of the community. I've heard people use the phrase out of control in describing the St. Louis Police Department.
Well, I certainly think that that's unfair. I think that when you look at the St. Louis Police Department and you look at its culture, we didn't get here overnight.
Where you'll find the St. Louis police are largely as a function of who you ask, and many are likely to answer in some way by referring to the events in and around Ferguson 5 years ago.
Well, I think certainly prior to Ferguson, in 2014, the relationship between police and the community was very fragile. It continues to be fragile.
Ferguson comes up again when you ask the police union about that fragile relationship, but in a different way. Any of your officers have an adversarial feel toward the community that they police?
No, not towards the community. I mean, they have an adversarial feel towards some elected officials and even folks in the media who, disparage police and do so based on a false narrative that came out of Ferguson and other places. But many believe the slew of controversies we're seeing right now has roots that go far beyond the unrest of 2014. SLMPD Sergeant Heather Taylor has a particularly interesting take. She's head of the Ethical Society of Police, the group that advocates for the city's African American officers. She says all the headlines are a function of a new accountability. The behavior, she says, has been there, just not the punishment.
I honestly feel that a good majority of these cases would never see the light of day if we didn't have the chief that we have, the restructured internal affairs division, and circuit attorney who's willing to prosecute officers who are doing wrong. When people say we're out of control, I'm glad that we are bringing these cases to some of these people we knew should have been fired long ago. There have been problems. We've presented the cases to them, and they've been, nope, nothing. We're sweeping under the rug, and now these things are coming to light.
One example is a list of officers Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner now keeps who she will not allow to testify in court. For a variety of reasons, she says they lack credibility. The most notable case, 22 city cops who Gardner blacklisted after they were named in a probe called the Plainview Project out of Philadelphia, which tied dozens of current and former St. Louis officers to racist social media posts.
It continues to fuel the mistrust in the criminal justice system with law enforcement, and it makes our jobs harder. So it hurts that victim who wants to call the police but is afraid already of the process of the criminal justice system. It makes it when you see an incident, you fail to want to call the police and be a witness because you're afraid of who you may come in contact with.
And many want to know why the current officers involved still have jobs. Many don't in other cities. In Philly, people got fired. Has anybody been fired?
Some people.
Right. But some people got fired. Has anybody been fired from the St. Louis Police Department?
We're in a process. Our process is much different than the Philadelphia process. We have a civil service process inside of the city of St. Louis, and it requires steps.
And I know the union is strong, but can anybody tell these guys, if you're going to fix this relationship with the community, this kind of stuff has to stop?
Well, the city of St. Louis, prior to 2018, never had a social media policy.